Yes. Richie, it's another Sunday. And if it's Sunday, it is Sunday Scoops. Welcome to everyone. Good afternoon. Hoping you're all having a pleasant Sunday. And today we're featuring the Melodians, led by Brent Dowe.
Absolutely. And we promise, this show promises a feast of music. It's, timely. We're getting a lot of pillaring back home in Jamaica in terms of the music. Music will get a beating. Some of it deservedly, but in general, I would say, I think there's an overreaction. But guess what? This is the place you come to learn about Jamaican music, Sunday Scoops. And so today we are going to take you all to Jamaican Music School. Mr. Big G, what you have lined up on the turntable there to introduce the listeners to one of the best vocal groups, vocal and harmony groups to ever come out of Jamaica. Melodians, come on, little girl, come on. Big tune, he got.
Also, big group from out of Greenwich Town.
Absolutely. In fact, the group came together in 1965, just around the time when the ska beat was basically dissipating. According to Dog newspaper at the time, people figured the music was a little too fast, and the dancehall crowd couldn't manage, the sweating and the heat and so on. All of that are just conjecture, really. But the fact is that the music started slowing down because they were introducing instrumental changes into the music. People like Lynn Tate from Lynn Tate and the Jets, who came with a different view of how the music should be played, right, and basically slowed down the top end, and so as a consequence of which the music gradually slowed down.
From out of ska into rocksteady.
Absolutely.
But there were still a couple of studios who were producing ska still.
Yeah, well, ska never stopped. It's just that the music is a living thing, and given the necessity of a transformation, that's what took place. Now, the group, as you said earlier, formed in Greenwich Farm. Brent Dowe had come from country. He would have been about 11, 12 years old when his mother brought him into Kingston, and they settled down in Greenwich Farm. He connected with Tony Brevet, who was the nephew of the Scatterlight luminary Lloyd Brevet, who had been singing informally with Bob Marley, and at the time, Bob Marley and I, named George Allison, and they were singing at a little local youth club. But when Marley broke out as a solo recording artist, coming with Leslie Kong, his early Leslie Kong days,
right,
Brevet decided that they need to form a proper group, and so he found Trevor McNaughton, which was a tenorist and a baritone, Bradfield Brown, and they basically became the first iteration of the Melodians. Over time, McNaughton and Brent Dowe would replace Eddie and George. Now, the group was essentially a harmony group, if you will. They basically built themselves around that and did a lot of studio work, you're right, before they actually produced any kind of recording. In fact, the group got a little gig at a place called Kitty Mat Club, and they made their recording debut, according to Dog newspaper, with Prince Buster. But Prince Buster, it is said, kept most of those recordings, if not all of them, for the sound system, the Voice of the People sound system. And
so those records never really
come to life.
If you weren't around them time to hear the music.
I hear them. and so they moved to Coxon.
Studio One.
At Studio One. And Coxon, that's where they basically now hit the record. They produced a couple of records, most of which, hardly any of which made any big impact. Maybe we should give the listeners a little taste.
Yeah, I can give them a little taste. They had a couple of songs. Meet Me Late On, I Should Have Made It Up, Let's Join Hands. Those are some of the early records in Studio One. So here goes. Richard, they still did a couple of ska tunes with Studio One, even though...
I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm glad you mentioned it because, you know, it just got to a point we were raising before we came on the air that the music didn't stop at one genre and then pick up. You know, music was living, breathing. Ska was still in vogue. To a certain extent, the R&B was still in vogue as well. And they were just responding. As you said, they were, you know, the lyrics was reflecting what was going on at the time. And so, but as is usual with Coxsone, because they started out with Coxsone, and I guess you could easily say, you know, what they were producing really wasn't going anywhere. The other thing too is that at the time they would have been competing with people like John Holt and the Paragons. Right. You know, Paragons would have been formed around this time.
Then there were the Uniques.
You had the Uniques with Slim Smith. You had the Techniques, which was about coming through the gate at the same time. The Maytals would have been around.
Right.
Too. So the landscape was crowded. And of course, you have the Wailers.
And you had the Tenors.
So it was a crowded field. The Clarendonians, everybody was there at the time. Yeah. And so they decided to peddle their wares somewhere else. You know, Coxsone and them had some money issues. And so they basically decided to saunter over to Treasure Isle at Bond Street with the great Duke Reid. And of course, immediately that move started to pay some dividends.
And one of the things I want to remind the listeners is that at the time, Duke Reid, if you wanted to do rocksteady, that was the place to be, because to a certain extent, Studio One kind of took a back seat. I mean, not that they didn't do rocksteady, don't get me wrong, but when it came to pound for pound in terms of production and the quality of production.
And that's a very interesting argument, a very interesting point, Guy, because one of the things we need to appreciate is that rocksteady music was essentially born out of American R&B music. What a lot of the artists were doing, they were listening to the sound of these groups, the Temptations, the Four Tops, Martha and the Vandellas from that period. And so they were trying to recreate, in fact, a lot of the music that were being sung at the time were essentially American R&B that were given a local adaptation, a local flavor, and presented as rock steady. So, what is significant is that a man like Duke Reid, for him, Duke Reid was a man noted for his liking for R&B music, blues and jazz.
Yes.
So, and which is why he paid so much attention to the arrangement of his music. In fact, what Duke Reid was doing is, when he came in, he made the records a little longer. The typical record was 2 minutes. Duke Reid would go to 2.5, 3, 4 minutes sometimes. But he paid a lot of attention to instrumentation, because that's what was consistent with him as a man who loved jazz and blues.
Here for the classical aspect of music.
And so let's give the listeners a little piece of
one of the early productions.
The early productions with Treasure Isle.
1967.
There we go. Yes.
3 big hits. Not 3, no, Richard, 3.
But it just shows, that they always had the talent. And, there's an ongoing discussion currently in Jamaica in terms of the music and its impact. And, we are basically the product of our environment. Whatever, what the singers are doing are responding to what is out there. Melodians went to Coxsone, and Coxsone didn't do any justice. In fact, to your point, Coxsone was more interested in cutting ska and blues and jazz tunes. And so when he got a rock steady group, a harmony group. He basically, I guess, he was also responding to the embarrassment of riches that was available at the time, because he had a whole heap of youngsters crowd up the studio and everybody can sing, but they went to Treasure Isle and look at the result. 3 big classic tune, and even today, anywhere you play them tune behind each other, you're gonna get a massive crowd response, because that was just the quality of the sound coming. And what you're listening to, if you listen to the arrangement of the music, you get that full taste of the impact of somebody like a Lynn Tate and the studio band that he led, the Jets. Lynn Tate's guitar literally represented almost another vocalist, if you will. You almost hear the sound of the guitar speaking, if you will. And then you listen to Tommy McCook and the horn sections that he brought with him, which kind of leveled out the band. But this was Melodians opening their account at Treasure Isle and showing them class. And all 3 songs. Last Train to Expo 67, again, this was, you remember Expo 67 was a major trade expo.
Millie Small, Jimmy Cliff.
No, Expo 67 was a local trade exposition. You're talking about 64 when they went to the world thing. But this, and again, singers creating material out of what was operating on the ground. The songs you played, You Caught Me Baby, Last Train to Expo 67, Come On Little Girl. They did another song, I Just Know How She Feels, and they also redid a song that they did with Coxsone called Let's Join Hands. So let's just run out, again, some of these titles are not among the popular titles, right? But at the very least, we want to give the listeners an idea of the range that was coming from the Melodians. So over to you, Mr. Gar.
Yes, the sweet, sweet voice of Mr. Brent Dowe, boy, I tell you. I like him sing rugged in Richard. The road of life is so rugged.
But let me tell you something. One of the other things that came through here, you played a little piece of Uriah at the end there, where 1967, 1968, the rocksteady beat is now, and the rocksteady era never stayed long, but the quality of the output, the versatility of the artists, musicians are still in vogue. It was a period where the studio is comprised of more or less a full band.
I thought like today. The studio was cloudy.
The studio kind of cloudy. But the music is reflecting a kind of atmosphere, and I think a lot of us, especially those who still have some recollection of the music coming out of that period, is kind of stuck in. It was a nice period. It was a time when Jamaicans were a lot kinder to each other, certainly. But we tend to forget that the technology is what determines, what drives what is happening. Yeah. And a big part of the music and its development at that time was technology, because a couple of things was now coming in. First of all, you had the tendency was to play with more expansive band arrangements.
Because at the time, your mixing board in studio had more channels.
Absolutely. And you're coming from a situation where you have studios where 1 or 2 track studios. So you now have, more equipment. And then you had, what's his name, Baron Lee made the argument that the Fender bass, right? Mm-hmm. Which sort of changed not only the sound, but it made the music a lot more portable. And then you had on top of that the introduction of the organ, which would sort of replace some of the horn section. The tendency prior to the organ was the use of wind instruments. But the industry opened up and more studios came into play, what you saw was the infusion of the technology into broadening out the music. Certainly, around this time, Scatterlights had left. Scatterlight had dissipated, and so on. So you're getting a difference with the music. We're heading into a break, and so what we want to do is pick it up when we come back. Let's try and go make a little money. Not yet. I know you want to play the silver nutty egg. You know, the man never said nutmeg, he said nutty egg.
Yes, a silver nutty egg.
Silver nutty egg. But anyway, this is Melodians. The two tunes you played earlier just now is Melodians at Tip Top Studios with Sonia Pottinger. And again, the same situation that is constant among Jamaican music in this period, where the musicians, the creators of the music have problems with the producers, the studio owners. And of course, it was no less with Treasure Isle, which in fact Treasure Isle offered the group, the Melodians group, better money, and so they left Coxsone. And in no time, they ran into the same problems with Duke Reid. They're turning out music, but problems in terms of getting the kind of remuneration. And so, again, they hit the road, and this time they went to Sonia Pottinger, who by this time now had taken over our husband's facilities and is now producing, she now hanging out her own shingle.
Yes.
And the immediate result of that was Little Nut Tree, Swing and Dine, among other tunes. Now, around the same time, what the Melodians were doing, everybody trying to find, a sort of a foundation for themselves, right? At the time, too, you had other music creators in the business. Of course, they formed, joined up with the Gay Lads and Ken Booth, who was trying to put out a label. I think the label was called Lynx, right? And again, these were just artists coming to terms with the business of owning their own creativity. And you can't fault them for that. You know, a feature of the music in Jamaica at the time is that it basically developed organically. And most of these guys, they weren't trained business people. Most of them weren't even trained musicians. They just had an idea.
Read or write.
A few of them, quite a few of them, and some names that you would never believe. But they were trying a thing, and so I think the arrangement with Pottinger allowed a lot of them, and in particular the Melodians, to come to terms with their own value, their creativity, and so the music that they were producing now took an entirely different turn.
There was also one of the Melodians, Richie, who, even though he left the group as a singer, he still stuck around as a writer. I think his last name was Kogel.
Yes.
Because if you look at a couple of the record labels, you know, especially when he co-wrote with Brent Dowe or Tony Brevet.
Mm-hmm. Renford Kogel. In fact, he stayed with the group up on the outs and the periphery as a silent partner, silent member, if you will. He never sang, he just basically wrote material. But they were also, the rest of them, they were always writing their own material for the group.
And some of the other songs that came out at the time too was a redo of Saldina's, It Comes and Goes, and another song called Sweet Rose. Let's give the listeners a
taste of that, right?
Listen of what was going on. But before we get into that, Richard, we did promise that we were going to lick back Swing and Dine again. So
swing and dine and dance for your money.
With Swing and Dine. Saldina's He Comes and Goes, and the Melodians renamed it It Comes and Goes.
The beat, nice. And I think, this tune though was released, they were still with Sonia Pottinger at the time. Right. But they were moonlighting, if you will, under the Lynx label. In fact, they released 2 tunes under the Lynx label, and this was one of them. and the other tune was Sweet Rose. Of course, I think who was in that Lynx partnership? I think I mentioned Gay Lads,
Yes,
Ken Booth,
yes.
Delroy Wilson was part of that. And again, it's a very significant piece of historical information from a Jamaican music standpoint. Because the truth be told is, here was a time, the music is opening up. This is 1968, 1969. And the artists are now recognizing that the music thing is more than just you go sing a little one song, right?
Real money could be made.
The
You could
common,
make a living.
eh?
You could,
Yeah, you could make a living. In fact, remember, Uri by this time had started to carve out a little niche for himself by DJing on a lot of Paragon's music and even some of the same Melodians tune which he took up a little later on. But the music thing was now showing itself in terms of its industry developmental potential. And the artist wanted to be part of that, you know. I guess, like most things, you don't have the proper guidance, you are going to fall by the wayside, as a lot of them did. Even Dennis Brown himself had attempted, well, I think Dennis had about 3 or 4 different labels. Delroy, this was one of his efforts. He also had 2 other efforts at trying to raise up a label, which is an important part of the foundational development of the music. If, as an artist, if you have no say, no ownership in terms of the material that you're creating, all that happens is that the studio pay you £20, or you know, you get a £50, and that's it. And no matter what else happened to that tune in perpetuity, all you can do is tell your friend, I mean, sing that, you know. Right? I mean, sing that. Watch the harder they come.
But I tell you this though, it seemed a lot of times that I think it's a national virus in Richie, that some artists find more a part of notoriety in terms of saying that I did that song rather than showing the monetary thing for the effort. It's later on now when they realize what could have been done, then the lament was, boy, if I did know.
Listen, the truth be told, it is a feature of the music business, not only in Jamaica, but everywhere.
I did that song, I did it.
Well, the studio, everybody want to hear them voice on a record. And in fact, the Jamaican music experience was developed out of that. These artists, they started or they participated in the talent contests, Vera John's Opportunity Hour, and a myriad of other community contests. A lot of these singers will tell you listen to them stories, them tell you, them used to have in Jonestown, you used to have a little Penn Street singing competition. And you go over the big yard and no microphone, no recorded material, it's just a matter of which singer or group get the biggest forward, the biggest applause. And so out of that, they would decide that, hey, there's a talent contest down at Ambassador Theatre. Right. And so them gather up and they enter the contest and they carry the era crowd. So it's the same thing. We got out of the 50s where Stanley Motors had started to record, provide, the recording capabilities. And so Jamaicans were encouraged to come and record their voices.
It's like with photography.
There you go. So everybody, we criticize it, but that is the foundation on which the business and the studio end of the thing developed. And so people want to hear their voices and then run to the studio and you create a tune. Look at, we can go back to the early days of the Theophilus Beckfords and the Derrick Harritons. It's the same situation. So you come into the, Treasure Isle, and while some singers are not readily educated enough about the business to talk to the studio operator about money. In fact, most of the people who go to Treasure Isle studio will tell you, them sing a song and then wait for another 5 hours just to make eye contact with Duke Reid so that him know say them a weight pan them like a 20 pound because you know and if Duke Reid put him on pan the gun angle pan him have around him waist.
It's all right, boss. All right.
Everybody run out of the studio and left Duke, so them not make no money, and you know ultimately everybody are dead for hunger. So they were trying, and you have to give them that credit.
So the effort that they did, that Link's effort, there's a couple more songs, When There Is You and then Ring of Gold. We can look at those.
Let's touch that.
We can get into when they made their other move right after that. Yeah. As Big Youth would have said. Yeah, Richie, what we did there was, on the Link's label, we played When There Is You, Sweet Rose, Ring of Gold, You've Got It, and Personally Speaking, which are all very good songs. I just think that the timing was probably wrong on some of these. And, you know, sometimes even though a song is not an anthem, like, you know, like a Swing and Dine, it doesn't, at the time in the Jamaican dancehall, it don't mean that people didn't respond favorably to these songs, and they just never met the cut.
And it makes my point, a point that I've been hammering out, particularly over the last week, and here and on social media. And artists have a wide catalog. There are a lot of Bob Marley songs that people don't know because you keep hearing the same songs all the time. The same thing with the Melodians. They had an extensive catalog. They suffered a little bit because they kept moving from studio to studio. Excuse me. In fact, this was an effort they were doing with a guy called Winston Lowe, who had the label was called the Tramps label. And so the Links thing was Delroy Wilson and Ken Booth and them other guys, but this was with Winston Lowe. And he did a fair amount of music they did a fair amount of music with him. They were not popular songs, as you rightly pointed out, because well, we don't know them because to a large extent they're not played.
And then we may get that cultural deficit, or what should I say, cultural disconnect, like what I experienced last year. One of my buddies, you know, from England, and he's living here in Florida. It was his birthday, and I went over to the park ready to listen to some wicked music, and they were playing some wicked music, but for me, they were reggae music, but I did not have a clue, because guess what? I didn't live in England at the time, so I didn't know anything, half of the songs that they played. The crowd was reeling up and everybody was singing, and I'm sitting there looking like a dejected kid at break time that nobody wouldn't play with. So, British Lovers Rock is a social disconnect, really, when it comes to the average Jamaican, the music that we grew up listening to. And the funny thing is that they knew all of the songs that we know from Jamaica, but the songs that they liked in their parties, we didn't know it. So some of these songs may have been popular amongst people in England, and, you know, and we just don't know.
It's an interesting point. I was in England in 2008, 2009, and my friend Clive Cunningham, who I know Clive don't miss this program, big up yourself, Clive. But we went down in the music, the reggae music areas of London, and Clive, you know, that's the business he was in. And you're right, I hear some rocksteady and some lovers rock that, I mean, can hold them on anywhere. But the fact is that's not music that was being played here in Jamaica. And so just to bring it back to where we are, you know, what we're doing is that we're exploring the whole, as much as possible, the catalog of work, the body of work that the Melodians did. And so, you know, for some of those people, you hear some songs that you probably never heard before. But, you know, if we're getting into the catalog, that is what we're going to get. There are a couple more songs, Lonely Nights, Hey Girl, What More Can I Say? And then after that, I think they moved over to Leslie Kong, What I Love You to God. It's touch a few more of them songs. And then we want to, when we come back for the next 1 hour segment, we're going to look at the work that they did, because it is with Leslie Kong at Beverly's that really set the thing alight. And in fact, out of which they would have gone back and revisited Coxon and Treasure Isle again to do some more work with. We're going to take a look at that. Hi there. If you enjoyed that clip, go on over to our website at yardmedia.com where you can watch the entire broadcast at your leisure. And while you're there, why don't you check out our other reggae music features? And before you leave, pick up some of our Jamaican reggae merchandise, and hey, don't forget to tell your friends.